Intelligence is an illusion until it's tested, and most people never test it. They assume they're rational. They believe their ability to follow instructions, repeat information, and navigate daily tasks are enough to prove their intellectual capacity. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer would have laughed at that. He knew better. In his world, watching an entire nation surrender their minds to ideology. And in yours, true intelligence is not about what you know. It's about what you refuse to accept without question. And the only way to know if you're truly thinking is to test your resistance to comfortable lies, without warning, quietly, strategically, brutally if necessary. Because the truth is, most of the people around you are not stupid in the way you think. They're not lacking information or incapable of complex thought. They're suffering from something far more dangerous, induced stupidity. And Bonhoeffer discovered that this condition is not natural. It's manufactured, it's contagious, and it's designed to make intelligent people behave like fools while believing they're being reasonable. Bonhoeffer believed that real intelligence reveals itself not when you can recite facts, but when you can think independently under pressure. That's why he devised not tests for knowledge, but tests for mental independence. Small, calculated moments of intellectual resistance. Not to show off your intelligence, but to uncover whether you still possess it. You don't ask yourself, "Am I smart?" You put yourself in positions where thinking for yourself costs you something. That's when the mask of manufactured consensus slips. From his prison cell, watching his countrymen, doctors, lawyers, professors, engineers, march in lockstep toward collective insanity, Bonhoeffer realized something terrifying. Stupidity is not the opposite of intelligence. It's the abandonment of it. He wrote, "The stupid person is often not lacking in cleverness, but he has become a tool, and stupidity is a moral rather than an intellectual defect." This was his breakthrough. The people destroying his country weren't born stupid. They weren't genetically inferior or naturally incapable of reason. They were intelligent people who had surrendered their intelligence to something else: ideology, social pressure, the comfort of not having to think for themselves. They had become functionally stupid. And the most terrifying part? They felt smart while doing it. Stop agreeing with widely accepted ideas just because everyone else does. Pick a belief that everyone knows is true, something in politics, health, social norms, career advice, and deliberately examine it from the opposite perspective. Not to be contrarian, but to see if your brain still works independently. Watch your internal response. Do you immediately feel uncomfortable? Do you worry about what others would think if they knew you were questioning this? Do you find yourself reaching for familiar talking points instead of examining the evidence? If questioning popular opinion makes you anxious, you've already failed the test. Your intelligence has been replaced by social conditioning. Bonhoeffer would say you've become a tool of collective thinking. And tools don't think, they just function as designed. True intelligence doesn't waver when consensus pressure mounts. It doesn't require majority approval to examine ideas. In fact, when you withdraw from the comfort of accepted wisdom, real thinking emerges. It checks claims against evidence, not against popularity. But the functionally stupid, they panic when forced to think alone. They immediately seek validation from their chosen authorities, their preferred sources, their comfortable echo chambers. Let them. You didn't lose their agreement. You revealed that they never had independent thoughts to begin with. Introduce deliberate emotional distance from stories designed to make you feel a certain way. News that makes you angry, social media that makes you outraged, content that makes you afraid or euphoric. Something that signals you're being emotionally managed rather than informed. Now watch your reaction. Can you analyze the information without being swept up in the emotional current? Do you suddenly become defensive when someone questions the narrative you're emotionally invested in? Bonhoeffer would say, The stupid person is always emotionally activated and intellectually passive. What this test does is threaten the comfort you've built around feeling rather than thinking. If you can't examine emotionally charged information objectively, your intelligence has been hijacked by your feelings. A truly intelligent person doesn't just process information, they process the intent behind the information. They don't oppose emotional content directly, but underneath what they're really asking is, who benefits from me feeling this way? This is the moment where you must become surgical. Observe your emotional responses, don't be controlled by them. Let the manipulation reveal itself. The more emotionally charged a piece of information is, the more you should examine why someone wants you to feel rather than think. Go completely silent on seeking intellectual validation from others. Not as punishment, not to prove superiority, but to create space and see what your mind does when it's not being constantly influenced by external voices. Stop asking others what they think about complex issues. Stop sharing articles to get agreement. Stop participating in intellectual echo chambers. Online forums, discussion groups, social circles where everyone already agrees with you. Bonhoeffer would say, the absence of external validation reveals the presence or absence of internal conviction. This test hurts because it breaks your illusion of independent thinking. But illusions are dangerous. Bonhoeffer knew that the greatest threat to any thinking person was not external propaganda. It was the internal comfort of never having to think alone. So you must treat your mind like a fortress, and not every popular idea deserves access to that fortress just because it feels good to believe. Put yourself in positions where you must defend a true but unpopular position. Not to be difficult, but to see if you still have the intellectual courage to stand by facts when they're socially costly. This is where true intelligence either sharpens or shatters. Some people are only smart when it's convenient, when their intelligence aligns with social acceptance. The moment they have to think something that might isolate them socially, they retreat, not out of wisdom, but because independent thought makes them uncomfortable. Why? Because they were never thinking for themselves. They were borrowing the thoughts of their preferred group. If that group disappears or turns against them, they have no intellectual foundation left. Bonhoeffer would say, the one who thinks when thinking is dangerous is the only one worthy of calling himself intelligent. Give yourself opportunities to notice when information, entertainment, or social environments are designed to make you think less, not more. Subtle, strategic, not extreme, but real. Media that oversimplifies complex issues, content that tells you what to think instead of how to think, social situations where questioning is discouraged. Watch closely. Do you automatically accept simplified explanations for complex problems? Do you find yourself repeating phrases you've heard without examining their meaning? Do you become uncomfortable when forced to think deeply about things you've accepted superficially? This test doesn't just reveal your intelligence, it reveals whether you can recognize when you're being deliberately made stupid. And that recognition, unlike passive consumption, is the beginning of intellectual resistance. The reality is, most people will fail one of these tests because most people have been systematically trained to abandon independent thought. They're not naturally stupid. They've been made functionally stupid by systems that profit from their intellectual passivity. Bonhoeffer didn't care about whether people could pass academic tests. He cared about whether they could still think when thinking became dangerous. And the outcome of these tests is clarity. You'll lose the comfort of intellectual conformity. But what you gain is something far more valuable, a mind that cannot be easily manipulated. You don't need everyone's agreement to be right. You don't need popular support to think clearly. You need zero external validation to examine evidence. The kind who questions when questioning is discouraged, who thinks when thinking is unfashionable, who examines when examination is labeled as dangerous. But you'll never know if that's you until you test it. Most people go their entire lives surrounded by intellectual comfort zones, sources that tell them what they want to hear, groups that confirm what they already believe, authorities that do their thinking for them. They call this being informed, they call this being educated. But Bonhoeffer would call it what it truly is: voluntary intellectual slavery masking itself as reasonable discourse. And unless you're willing to step back and test your intellectual independence, you'll spend your life building conclusions on manufactured consensus, trusting in ideas that were never examined, and repeating thoughts that were placed in your mind by people who benefit from your intellectual passivity. When you test your intelligence, you're not being paranoid, you're being responsible. You're not creating conspiracy theories. You're revealing how easily intelligent people can be made to think stupidly. That distinction is everything, because people will try to shame you for questioning. They'll say you've become a conspiracy theorist, say you're overthinking now, say you don't trust anything anymore. And they're partially right. You don't trust intellectual shortcuts anymore. Not until an idea has been examined from multiple angles. Not until it's passed through your independent analysis rather than your social conditioning. You don't accept popular wisdom like it's automatically true. You make ideas prove themselves through evidence, not through repetition. There's something unsettling that happens when you begin applying these tests of intellectual independence. The information sources you trusted start to reveal themselves as influence operations. The social discussions you enjoyed show themselves as echo chambers. The authorities you respected demonstrate they're more interested in compliance than truth. Why? Because when someone benefits from your intellectual passivity, your independent thinking becomes a threat. They feel it. The shift in you, the questions, the resistance to easy answers. And if they were profiting from your mental compliance, they won't celebrate your intellectual awakening. They'll try to shame you back into conformity. That's how you know the test worked. See, a functionally stupid person is not always unintelligent. Sometimes they're just intellectually comfortable. They've surrendered the hard work of independent analysis. They change their opinions when social winds shift. They need you to agree with their chosen authorities, and the moment you start thinking for yourself, they begin to treat your intelligence as a social problem. Bonhoeffer would say, "The intellectually lazy will always mistake independent thought for dangerous thinking. This is where most people fail. They start thinking independently, they begin questioning popular narratives, and still they apologize for it. Out of social pressure, out of the desire to fit in, out of that old, deadly question. But what if I'm wrong, and everyone else is right? You might be wrong about specific facts, but you're not wrong for thinking. When your ability to analyze improves in intellectual solitude, when your questions become more precise, when your conclusions become less dependent on social validation, you already have your answer. You're just afraid of the social cost of intelligence. Bonhoeffer wasn't interested in intellectual comfort. He was interested in intellectual courage. And courage requires independent thinking. You cannot afford to let others do your thinking for you, not if you're building something meaningful, not if you're navigating complex realities, not if your decisions carry consequences and your beliefs shape your actions. You must know that your mind works independently, not hope it does, not assume it does. Know it. And here's the paradox. Once you begin living this way, questioning popular consensus, resisting emotional manipulation, thinking in intellectual solitude, truly intelligent people reveal themselves too. It's not all isolation from independent thought. Real intelligence attracts real intelligence. When you demonstrate intellectual independence and someone engages with your ideas rather than trying to shame you back into conformity, that's rare. That's not groupthink. That's alliance between minds that still function independently. And it doesn't come often. When it does, you protect it like gold, because you'll start to realize one person who thinks independently is worth more than 100 who repeat popular opinions. You'll also realize something else. Intelligence isn't loud. It doesn't broadcast itself. It doesn't need to prove itself through academic credentials or social approval. Intelligence is consistent questioning, calm analysis, the ability to examine ideas without being emotionally hijacked by them. When someone is truly intelligent, you feel it not just when they agree with you, but when they challenge you with better questions, clearer analysis, more rigorous thinking. The beauty of Bonhoeffer's approach is that it doesn't require confrontation. No arguments with true believers, no attempts to convert the functionally stupid. Just patterns, questioning, emotional distance, intellectual solitude, independent analysis, and then observation. Let others reveal their intellectual dependence. Let their discomfort with your questions speak louder than their repeated talking points ever could. Most people are terrified of this. They don't want to know if they can actually think independently. They'd rather live in the comfort of intellectual conformity than discover they've been functionally stupid while believing they were informed. But that fear is what keeps them controllable, informed but not thinking, educated but not intelligent, opinionated but never truly examining their opinions. And Bonhoeffer would remind you, the ability to think independently always outweighs the comfort of thinking collectively when truth matters. So when you begin questioning consensus, examining emotional manipulation, thinking in solitude, you're not becoming paranoid, you're becoming intellectually sovereign. Precision in thinking is not conspiracy theorizing, it is mental clarity. And those who can't handle your questions were never intellectually honest to begin with. They were comfortable being functionally stupid, relying on others to do their thinking, needing external authorities to feel smart. That's not intelligence. That's intellectual dependency disguised as education. You are here to think, to question, to examine ideas before accepting them. And you do that by testing every comfortable belief, every popular narrative, every emotional trigger before it controls your thinking. Test them, analyze them, and when they prove to be manipulation rather than information, don't argue with those who are invested in the manipulation. Don't try to wake up those who are comfortable being intellectually asleep. Just think clearly and let your independent analysis guide your conclusions. Because the truth is, most people have been made functionally stupid, not through lack of education, but through systematic discouragement of independent thought. And recognizing this isn't pessimistic, it's the first step toward intellectual freedom. There's a strange clarity that settles in when you realize how many people around you have surrendered their ability to think independently. Not immediately. At first it feels isolating, like you're the only one who sees certain obvious truths. But that isolation isn't paranoia, it's intellectual honesty. It's space being created for actual thinking, not just the repetition of approved thoughts. And Bonhoeffer would say, real intelligence doesn't grow in crowds of conformity. It grows in the disciplined solitude of minds that refuse to be made stupid. Every piece of intellectual independence you reclaim is not a loss of social connection. It's a recovery of mental function. You're not becoming antisocial. You're becoming intellectually honest. Because when your thinking is truly your own, other people's ideas become contributions to your analysis, not replacements for it. That transforms everything. Every piece of information you encounter gets examined rather than accepted. Every authority figure gets questioned rather than automatically trusted. Every popular narrative gets analyzed rather than emotionally absorbed. That's what makes independent thinkers dangerous to systems that depend on intellectual compliance, and that's what makes them invaluable to anyone who actually wants to understand reality, rather than just feel comfortable about it. The more precise you become in your thinking, the quieter your intellectual world gets. Not empty, clear, not lonely, honest. You stop mistaking information repetition for knowledge. You stop confusing emotional activation for understanding. You begin to crave the discipline of examining ideas without the noise of social pressure. The people who remain in your intellectual circle already demonstrate independent thinking, not just agreement with your conclusions, but the ability to question, analyze, and examine ideas rigorously. And in that intellectual honesty, there is no need for ideological conformity, no requirement for groupthink, just mutual respect for the rarest thing in a world designed to make people functionally stupid, minds that still work independently. Those minds are society's immune system against manufactured stupidity. And once you realize yours is one of them, your responsibility becomes clear. Think clearly, question deeply, and never apologize for intellectual independence. Because in a world where intelligence is being systematically undermined, the person who refuses to be made stupid becomes the most dangerous threat to those who profit from collective intellectual surrender. And that's exactly what Bonhoeffer knew they were afraid of. People who couldn't be made to stop thinking.